All right, so we're picking up on the Imitation of Christ, and we're going to admit Tom. And we're on chapter 5 on knowing yourself. Now, this as a title, every Vedantin who reads that title will be like, oh, yes, here we go. Let's see if they go anywhere in the same area or not. Because really, that notion is not really part of Christianity, that idea of knowing yourself. Um, but then I grew up in a more of a fundamentalist evangelical tradition, and they've kind of lost almost everything. Um, they left it all behind, and I didn't even realize that. I even went to seminary back in 1983, and still wasn't aware of that because I went to a Church of Christ school, and so I really wasn't even aware of that until about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when I went up to Holy Cross and spent a year with a Benedictine brotherhood up there in order to work on a paper called Vedic Christianity. And that's where I learned about all of the church fathers and all of the early writings that were around that were, to pull the Bible out of the ground that it's rooted in and just take the Bible. Wow, what a short-sighted, really an ignorant move that was, because there's hundreds, maybe thousands of writings around that time that help you significantly to understand the Bible and to understand, and those books are just as important to Catholics. And of course, my tradition would have poo-pooed Catholicism, but after all, it is the Catholic Church that gave the Bible to Christianity. So it's a very interesting, and that wasn't even until like 400 years after Christ. So the first 400 years of Christianity were really, there was no formal book. The book of Hebrews said that all scriptures are profitable for teaching and for reproof and for training up one in righteousness. And I was trained to think that meant the Bible, that the Bible's the scripture they're talking about there. But the Bible didn't exist when that scripture was written. So that's kind of a big stretch. So I really nowadays take that at face value, that all scriptures, all the world's scriptures are beneficial for teaching, for training and reproof in the training of righteousness. And so, but in Christianity, modern evangelical Christianity, there's no idea of the self. There's the soul, but that's always abstracted. It's not really something you run into until you get to heaven. In Christianity, everything's posited to becoming later, and you live for after you die. You don't live for living. And so this idea of knowing the self is not native to the brand of Christianity I grew up in. But let's see what it has to say here, or what Thomas A Kempis, is that right, has to say. Yes. All right. We cannot count on ourselves much, for often through lack of grace and understanding, our judgment is a limited one, and we soon lose what we have through our own neglect. Often we are unaware of our own interior blindness, and many times we do evil, and what is far worse, we justify it, right? We justify everything that we do. We have to come to a point of where we think it's the right move, or at least the best move available in the moment, before we do it. Because we are of a divine nature. We are not of a fallen nature. The fallen nature is what has made us unable to really count on ourselves or to depend on ourselves, like the point he just made. But really, when we do a dedicated practice, that's the point of the practice, is to purify mind so that it does become a source of truth. We can hear the inner guru, and we can act according to our divine principle that's marked within us, that Sat Chit Ananda. And so, but it is true that as we do evil, and we do come up with stories to support the way we are, excuses for being the way they are, explanations for being the way that we are, with each one of those, we kind of curve our thinking and bend our thinking a bit, and it becomes less and less dependable. And we get in the habit of doing that. And it's not just for doing evil, it's pretty much for everything that we're engaged in. we bend it according to our egoistic story of who we are and what we are. And so because of that desire, or because of that action of the ego, which we are often not aware that we're acting through, we can't really trust ourselves. So as long as we are primarily egoistically driven, that we are primarily identified with body and mind, thinking that that's who we are, while we're in that state, what he says here is very true, that we cannot trust our own intuitive nature, that we can't hear the voice of the divine within because of the chatter of the mind, because of wrong thinking, because of attachments, and because of desires. We have projected ourselves in the wrong direction. He says, sometimes our passions rule us. Yes, that's part of the problem. And we mistake it for zeal. That's important. That little sentence right there is important. Because Ramakrishna was a little bit uncomfortable with loose emotionalism in religion. You know, he was a little bit concerned with getting worked up into a frenzy of emotion and calling it a religious state, because he says that is quite often sensuality. It is often not accompanied by a life of discernment and a life of renunciation, right? And so he's very careful to teach us that religion without renunciation or discernment is sentimentality. It doesn't grow into a mature tree. It kind of stays splashing in the puddles around the bottom. So he's bringing that up here, that sometimes we are critical of the small defects in our neighbors, but overlook the serious faults in ourselves. It's quite often that we are looking at their faults in order to build ourselves up. Well, at least I'm not like that. You know, I'm not as bad as they are. And it's, you know, and the easier that sin, the less common and easier that sin is to pick out in others, the more likely you are to do it, you know, because it's easy to make you look good. You know, at least I'm not like that. At least I don't do that. So we are quick to complain of what we put up with from others, with never a thought of what others are suffering from us. Right? Basically, this is lacking that discernment that we're talking about, lacking that inner awareness. It comes from not paying attention to our inner world, from not seeing how the mind works, not seeing how the ego is constructed, not spending the time in silence to source the voices that we've given credence to in our own mind, right? If we would see ourselves as we really are, we would not find cause to judge others severely. That's exactly right. One, because we would know that we are none of those things. We are not evil. We are not unrighteous. We are not wicked people. We are the image of God, but we have adopted an ego that distorts that perspective and causes us to appear selfish, causes us to appear immoral, or whatever you want to label that as. But the importance is to see ourselves as we really are. And he probably, I guess I won't say this before we get there, but I imagine he's still going to root himself in the ego self, because most Christian writers, when they write about the nature, human nature, the nature of the self, they don't talk about Adam before he fell. They talk about Adam after the fall. And so they see this distorted nature, the egoistic presence, the egoistic self. They see that as who you are. And they work from that perspective, which is why they're always referring to themselves as worms and unrighteous and, you know, filthy and all of these other lovely things that, you know, make a Vedantist flinch, because we go earlier than the fall of Adam. We go to Adam's original nature, made in the image of God. And so his image, his nature is ever pure and ever free and ever blissful. And he has to remember that nature in order to overcome desire. So we are quick to complain of what we put up with from others, and without a thought of what others are suffering from us. If we would see ourselves as we really are, we would not find cause to judge others severely. We'd be a lot more compassionate and empathetic is what it is. We would understand everybody really is. doing the best that they can, given the circumstances that they've been given. And that really, for us to help them would be impossible. We can at best love them, and they can take that as help or not. We do our worship by trying to eliminate suffering, but that's all we can do. Those who are turned to God consider the care of themselves before all other cares, and looking seriously into themselves, they find it easy to be silent about the deeds of others. Right? So he's crediting some spirituality here, that those of us who are practicing spiritual life, we become aware of our faults. We become aware of our wrong thinking. And we see what the struggle is to change even the simplest things about ourselves. We see the amazing investment that takes in life just to produce the slightest change in ourselves. And so that builds in us, if we've got a healthy and regular practice, that builds in us a sense of empathy, which is love. That builds in us a sense of compassion, which is love. That builds in us a sense of forgiveness, a sense of grace, because we are fully aware of how dependent on that grace we are in ourselves. And we have learned through our practice how freely God distributes that grace to quiet our mind and to soothe our inner pain that has caused. You will never be an interior person and a follower of Christ unless you learn not to meddle in the affairs of others and to look to your own. Right? Well, that's a very interesting scripture. Of course, I'm so tempted to go partisan on it, and just to jump into it and be like, oh my God, anybody else out there reading this? Anybody else reading this? Because this is just going on rich and thick in the fabric of our politics and society right now. So he says, you'll never be an interior person. You'll never be that person who's well rooted inside, who's silent and experiencing that inner peace. So you'll never be an interior person or a follower of Christ unless you learn not to meddle in the affairs of others and to look to your own. Pay attention to your life. Your life is the one that's important. It's not yours to get all worked up into a tizzy about the doings of others and about what their lifestyles are, what their choices are, or who they are, what they think they are, or what they think is up and down. It's not yours to meddle in that. It's yours to serve and to love, to nurture and to care, right? That is ours, not to judge. If you are concerned wholly with God and yourself, you will be unconcerned with what goes on around you. Where are you when you are not recollected, right? Where is your mind when you're not paying attention to the presence of the beloved within? If you're not paying attention to that awareness, which is the divine within you, right? He says, if you are concerned wholly with God, if your mind is really about God as it should be, involved in ceaseless prayer, being perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. He says, if you are concerned wholly with God and yourself, you will be unconcerned with what goes on around you, right? The affairs of the world are not your concern, not your interest. Your interest is the well-being of others. Let me set our mutes real quick. There we go. And of course, you can undo that at will. So be unconcerned with what goes on around you. Where are you? And this is his question to all of us when we're not in meditation, when we're not doing our mantra, when we're not having our mind or our awareness on the presence. He says, where are you? When you're not recollected, when you have not gathered yourself into your awareness, into your being present in the moment, to being fully here. And when you have been busy with other people's affairs, what have you to show for it if you have neglected yourself? Right? You're running around fixing everyone else, running around telling everyone else how they should live. And then next month they find you in the newspaper guilty of the exact thing that you were just condemning everyone around you for. Right? This is hypocrisy. And this is the danger of neglecting your practice. This is the danger of not being in the company of the beloved and not hanging out with like-minded folks who will help you stay aware and help you be your best self, as it were. If, therefore, you wish to have peace in your soul and to be united with God, both of those sound great to me, set aside everything else and focus the eye of your soul on your own deeds. So take that inner witness. And by deeds here can be meant anything that is changing. Your thoughts, your ideas, your values, your actions, your words, all of these things are expressions, and these things should never escape your own awareness of them. They should not escape your own awareness of what's going on in your inner world, right? Because that is where the living room of God is. The divine exists within the shrine of the heart, right? So if you wish to have peace in your soul and to be united to God, set aside everything else and focus the eye of your soul on your own deeds. If you want to advance spiritually, keep yourself free from temporal anxieties, right? Don't get caught up. This is the whole idea of karma yoga, not to get caught up in the anxiety of it by being goal driven, by having an objective in the future, not to be caught in the past with your things that you regret, from the past, things that you're sorry about in the past. These are temporal anxieties, worried about things that have to do with time-space causation, getting caught up in that, not being aware of that unchanging self, the witness within, not being aware of its nature, and defining yourself by the temporal things, by your body and mind. Those are the things caught in time. Those are the things ever changing. Those are the sand of the foolish man that he builds his house on, that falls down when the rains and winds of life blow, right? But that part of you, that unchanging self within, is the rock, the witness, the image of God. That within you is what you build a life on that will stand the torrents of life, the blowing of the winds of change. So if you want to advance spiritually, keep yourself free from temporal anxieties. Stop identifying with body-mind. Stop following your thoughts as being your own and chasing after results sometime in a magical future. And that includes your own realization. Don't go running after things in an imagined future. The future never comes, right? The future is always a concept, and the past was never real. It's just a residue collected by the mind. You will only lose ground if you set any value on material things. Boy, he's talking right up our alley tonight. Right? So anything, if you set any value on material things, you're going to fall back in the race. You're going to be distracted by them. They're not going to be helpful to you, right? If they become a goal, or if they become something you identify with or search after, you're going to get stuck. You're going to get into one of the loops, because all things in creation go in cycles. Everything goes in loops. And so if you buy into the paradigm, you also go in loops. Consider nothing great, nothing acceptable to you, unless it be God himself or of God. Right? This is a beautiful, beautiful ideal right here. Consider nothing great, nothing acceptable to you, unless it be God himself or of God herself. This is the only thing that's beautiful in life. This is the only thing that's lasting, that's profound, that gives meaning, that helps transcendence, that changes hearts, that changes people. This is the only power. The power of love is the only motivating power in the universe, according to Swami Vivekananda. So, and God is that love, right? So we don't consider anything else as being our goal or our fulfillment or our success, but the things of the divine and the things that fulfill our nature, that are inspired by our nature, inspired by our love and by our wisdom through our being. Whatever comfort you derive from any creature counts as nothing, right? Because we've talked about this in the past, the only comfort that this material world can provide is distraction. All of your vices are merely distractions. None of them will fix the problems that they're hiding. None of them will produce the fruits that you're desiring. All of these things that involve the material world at best are distractions. And that's why the teaching of the beloved in all of the religions, in all of the world's different traditions, is to take refuge in God alone, right? God alone, which is the moment, to be present, to be fully aware, to be observant to everything going on in body, mind, in your inner world, knowing what part of your inner world is you, that self, that silent self, emanating or inspiring from out of sight, from behind the senses, unperceived, because it doesn't change. It's without attribute. It's infinite, right? But it leaves a constant scent of its presence. And we become aware of that as the mind gets more subtle, as things quiet down inside. And so just know, when you hurt, when you're restless, when you're angry, when you're broken, when you need comfort, the divine is your first and only refuge. Go to the shrine. And I tell that story, right? Swami Buddhananda, the day I learned this one in earnest. I'd been in the monastery for 3 years. Greg, my partner in crime there, the other brahmachari, had left the monastery, and I was left alone there, and I was feeling horribly depressed and very lonely. And Swami comes in from the office, sees it, comes up the stairs. He says, "Oh, what is this?" And I tell him, "Raj, I'm feeling lonely. I'm really feeling depressed." And when he comes up the stairs, I'm expecting a hug, some encouragement. He does nothing, walks right by me, goes into his room, starts to shut the door, and just before it closes, he sticks his head there in the little crack and says, "So go to the shrine," and shuts the door, right? He was very careful, and to this day, I cannot appreciate him more for that. Because when I asked him why he was so stoic toward the monks and why his teachings were so stonewalled sometimes, he told me, "There will come a day when I will not be here for you. And if I teach you to rely on me for your encouragement and for your strength and for your comfort, what will you do in that day?" And so he trained me, go to the shrine. And I was standing right there at the top of the stairs outside the shrine. And it had not even occurred to me to go in there to take care of my problem of depression and loneliness. It just shows you, even as a monk, that didn't occur to me. Shows you the condition of the mind that I started with, in this adventure. And so quite often we don't think of God as real. That's why, Vivekananda makes that statement. He says most people really, if they were honest, are atheists, because we don't at all depend on God. We believe all kinds of things about God and power and miracles and whatnot, but ain't none of us walking on water. Ain't none of us moving mountains with faith the size of a mustard seed. We just use those as toys of comfort. But really, to dig in, to actually find the reality of the divine within yourself, and actually to find that reality of God to be effective in moving your actual life and changing and inspiring the nature of your inner world, that is what it is to take refuge in God. It means you've come to understand you're losing the war out there. There is no weapon great enough out there. There is nothing to sustain you out there. And until you return to the shrine of the heart for your meaning and for your purpose and for your fulfillment and for your bliss, you're just distracted. You're just stretched thinner and thinner and thinner in a world that's going to require more and more energy to maintain. Right? Those who love God and their own soul for the love of God despise everything else. For only the infinite and the eternal God can fill our every need and desire, the solace of our soul and the true joy of our heart. There you have it. Statement of the day. Those who love God and their own soul for the love of God despise everything else. Nothing even comes close. because those are the only things unchanging, right? The soul and the love of God. Those are the only two things unchanging in the universe. And so they are the place to build from. Those are where you put your energy, where you put your identity, and where you build your house, because that is the only place it will stand. If you build it on any other desire, any other inspiration, that will change with mood, change with perspective, change with condition, change with circumstance. But the love of God and the presence of God within you is that one and only unchanging reality. Right. All right. So he goes on here to chapter 6, on the joy of a good conscience. Indeed. On the joy of a good conscience. Right? A good conscience is you haven't lowered your ideal. A good conscience is you are living in integrity. Your words, your deeds, and your thoughts are in alignment. A beautiful space to inhabit. If you can become the kind of person where your deed, your thought, and your word are the same, then you're a person of deep integrity, and people will listen to what you have to say. People will silence themselves in front of you to hear what you have to say. I've witnessed this with Swami Vedananda. He's one of these men who has this kind of integrity. And he goes to these interfaith meetings all the time, and everybody's always talking over each other at the big table, always talking over each other. Swami Vedananda hardly ever says a word. Most of the time, he's just quiet. But when he spoke up, everyone else at the table was quiet when Vedananda spoke. Not out of any request or demand, but because everybody knew that Vedananda only spoke when he had something of great integrity to say, something that would be helpful and something that would be meaningful. And so to become this kind of person, this is what we're looking for. The glory of a good person is the evidence of a good conscience. Have a good conscience and you will always be happy. There's a challenge. There's a challenge for you. Clean up your conscience, do what you need to do and maintain it, and come back and find out, is this true? Is this true or is this not true? You should, when you read things like this, I mean, this is a pretty incredible promise right here, right? The glory of a good person is the evidence of a good conscience. Have a good conscience and you will always be happy. So he throws the gauntlet down. Clean up your conscience and stay true, right? Because what is your conscience? Your conscience is the voice, actually, of that divine principle. It's the voice of Satchitananda. And as long as we're attached to body and mind, we see the conscience belonging to other, right? And we sort of see it nagging us, It's the thing, we're like, will you just be quiet? Just let me be. Stop bothering me, right? Because it's always that self-righteous voice in our head. No, you shouldn't be doing that right now. I would get out of here. But when we become realized, that's one of our realizations, that the voice of our conscience was our true voice. The voice of our conscience was the voice of Satchitananda manifesting within us, trying to inspire us to right thinking, right doing, right action, And so as long as we see the voice of conscience as being separate from ourselves, we should look closely to see what it is we think ourselves to be. Because if the voice of conscience doesn't flow from what we think ourself is, we've got problems. There's trouble in paradise, indeed. There's snakes in the garden. A good conscience can bear a great deal and still remain serene in the midst of adversity, because you don't step out of yourself and get involved in the temporal, right? You just don't engage yourself because you're not egotistical. You don't give great worth to this particular of self. You give great worth to the principle of self, right? And so you're not interested in taking sides. You're not interested in getting your point across or making your improvement or getting it done your way. Those are not your concerns. As a person who's of good conscience, meaning a person of small ego, lacking in egoism, So you can bear a great deal. You can put up with a whole bunch of stuff in the kitchen. You know, you got 19 women in there, 19 men in there, all working on some task. And there's always you can see someone's nature by the way they work in the kitchen. Do they work well with others? Are they running around insisting that things get done their way? Are they running around correcting everybody? You know, are they trying to show everybody how to do it? Are they off by themselves because they've given up on everyone else? You know, you can always tell the nature of the people involved when they're trying to work together in a big group. And so he's telling you, if you have a good conscience, if you're true to yourself, right, to the real self, not the egoistic self, but if you're true to that divine nature, love and wisdom and the bliss of being within you, you're going to be able to bear anything. That crowd can be fighting with each other, throwing things at each other, and you're just going to be there laughing inside, you know, just kind of at the play of the divine. Look at this craziness all around, doing your job, cutting your vegetables, getting your work done in the bliss of happiness, unaffected, because you're not investing your ego in the change. You're just doing what you're doing, true to your nature, aware of the presence of your beloved, and going on. It's not even an endurance test for you, because it hasn't entered your free space at all. Right? A good conscience can bear a great deal and still remain serene in the midst of adversity, while a bad conscience is fearful and easily ruffled. Right? A bad conscience is defensive. Talking with defensive people is an art form. To be able to say anything, because anything that you say that's neutral or true is offensive to them, because they're on the defensive already. They're misunderstanding because they're standing in an insecure place. So your words of wisdom aren't going to help them. You have to first bring them into a space of security. That's the nature of love. That's why you don't jump in to help somebody without being asked by that person for help. Because if that person's not in a state of wanting to hear or have you help them, your jumping in and giving that is an act of egoism on your part and not an act of love. Egoism can be quite tricky in the sense that you might jump in to show someone that you're loving. Right? But that's egoism. When you act out of love, you just act. But it comes from a very gentle and concerned place. And you're doing it for the benefit of the other. Right? And so it was one thing I really learned one time, is that you can only correct another person to the degree of which they are convinced that you love them. Right? You can only correct somebody to the degree that they believe you love them. And so if you're running around correcting someone all the time, you better stop and think, do you run around and love them as much as you correct them? Right? Do you spend as much time showing your love as you do showing your correction for people? And if it gets to the point where you scream at people around you, you better sit down and think. Have you ever screamed at them because you loved them? You know, if your showing of love has not been as intense as your showing of correction, chances are you don't have a clear conscience and you're a hypocrite, and you're easily provoked. You're easily provoked into an unstable state. Right? So this is why he's writing this. I assume this is very important. To have a clear conscience is to be secure in yourself, because yourself is in alignment with your ideal, and your ideal is Satchitananda, the beloved. And as long as you're in that space and aware of that presence, you can't be disturbed. You can't be bothered. You're just going on, being there. And you're always looking for opportunities of expression, and they happen naturally, right? The expression of love, of helping. You know, somebody gets frustrated. You go over, no, you're doing great. Here, let me take a couple of those to help you out, right? And so that's how love helps. That's how love nurtures. Only be glad when you have done well. Evil persons are never really happy, nor do they feel peace within them. For there is no peace for the wicked, says the Lord. Right? And you know, of course, we have to be careful. There's no such thing as a wicked person who's only wicked. You know, so we got to be careful not to create these camps, which has happened in religion, because everybody is a complexity of possibilities, the complexity of ignorance and knowledge. of love and selfishness. And so we have to go, when we approach people, we approach that best part of them. We assume the presence of God first in each other, right? And then when we learn of the tigers and lions hidden in that person, then we make adjustments to salute them from a distance. Like, oh, okay, I better back away a little bit here. This person's not in a good state, not in a clear state inside. So I don't blame them or judge them for it. I have to change my tack of how I get love in between the cracks of that problematic state. How do I get love in there? How can I express my lack of danger to them? That I'm not judging them. I'm not going to hold it against them. I'm going to sit and listen until I can see where they're standing. And when they know that I'm listening, and when they know that I'm sitting next to them, that I understand what their perspective is, then we can take a step forward together, because teaching is never one direction. In this world, teaching always goes two directions. The teacher is always being taught at the same moment and to the same degree that the student is. That's the reality, because Mother alone does the teaching. And so all of us are students, even if the words are coming out of our own mouth. We are still the student of those words. And so we should know this, understand this. Only be glad when you have done well. It's very difficult to be happy if you are not following your nature. I'm going to say that instead of calling you an evil person, because I don't believe in evil people. There are people who are not following their nature, who do not know that their divine nature, their divine principle is love and wisdom practiced through their being. There are people who don't know that. There are people who think that they are rich people. They think that they're, middle-aged white men. They think that they're, black women. They have ideas about themselves that aren't based on that divine principle. And so they'll act from that place. If they act as a body, they're going to take that last piece of pizza. If they're acting from the point of a body, they're going to fill up, they're going to take half the potato salad, even though they're the first one through the line. And nobody else will have enough, because they'll be serving the needs of body. They'll be serving the needs of their moods and the needs of their states of mind. And so that is what is called evil, because it's coming from a particular perspective for a particular need, called selfishness, me and mine. And those two words disturb the mind. Anybody who builds their life on me and mine will not find peace, right? A person who purposely excites their vices within themselves will never find peace of mind. This is why he's teaching us about good conscience. Good conscience is to live according to your nature. Live according to Satchitananda. Let love and wisdom be what moves you. Even though the wicked may protest that peace is theirs and that no evil shall harm them, do not believe them, for God's wrath will suddenly overtake them, and all they have done will be brought to nothing and their plans destroyed. I'm just going to read over that. This is one of my least favorite things, because if that is true, you should only feel pain for that person. There should be no smug self-righteousness inspired in you at all. Because if you're a person still looking for God's wrath to overtake someone else, may God have mercy on you. That is not a loving perspective. Nobody wants to see anybody destroyed, right? Because we see oneness. We see ourselves in everybody. So let's just move. When we get into those moods, let's just kind of move across them. I had a friend, my friend Philip. We had an Orthodox Jew speak at one of our Memorial Day retreats in San Francisco, and he was quoting a lot from the Old Testament and read some verses in there that were quite troubling if you were a gay person. And so afterward, Philip went up to talk to the rabbi, and I was standing there with him, and he says, what do you do when you read those verses that says throw rocks at gay people until they die? What do you do with those things? How can those things? And the rabbi gave a great answer, or at least an entertaining answer. He said, I just turn the page and keep going. I just turn the page and keep going. So these, it's like that. So when you read these things, taking joy in someone else's undoing, or thinking, oh, God is going to work out my own vengeance. Well, no, better to drop your vengeance instead of employing God to fulfill it. Let's not go down that road. Those who love God will glory in tribulation, for their only joy is to glory in the cross of Jesus Christ our Lord. The glory given and received by humans lasts but a little while, and usually it is followed by sadness. That's right. Vivekananda says that. No wave can come without its lull. So that's why we don't use the word happiness when we talk about the bliss of our own nature. The bliss of our divine nature is not due to circumstance and is not due to causation. It's an isness. It's what we are. And it can only be experienced or witnessed or seen when the mind is silent, when the mind is thoughtless. At that point, your natural bliss becomes apparent to you. Your natural inner peace, the peace that passes understanding, becomes apparent to you. But when you're involved in the external world, when you've got your mind excited by the words me and mine and running of your life, you can't find that bliss. You can't find that joy. So you you struggle for happiness. And what is happiness? Happiness is a state of mind where all the conditions for a very brief moment are met. All the conditions are just right. And in that moment, you're happy. And then something changes and you don't even know what it was that changes. Something changes and suddenly you're just in a bad mood. Right? So those who love God will glory in tribulation. I mean, they'll be unbothered by tribulation. There is some idea in the Christian ideal of sharing in the suffering of Christ. I think that's a bit contrived. Why we're not looking for suffering, we're not looking for release from suffering. We're just looking at being present in the moment and creating beauty with what is given to us in the moment. That's where we live. Right? But he goes on with the thought, and nothing wrong with the thought. If you want to see your life in those terms, I do think it's going to cause you trouble actually in the long run. To seek out suffering is as unhealthy as seeking out pleasure. I'm not going to lie. So I don't think this is a good idea to follow, but I know that it's a common one. The glory given and received by humans lasts but a little while. That's right. Everything in this world, Thakur is talking about that all the time to us. This world, all of the joys of all of your fantasies and your deepest desires, even if you were able to fulfill them, you only stay fulfilled for very short times. And for those who have explored it and really given yourself permission to jump into the world, you find out that it gets worse than that. Because the things, your simple things that give you pleasure up front, you find that once you've done them, they're not enough anymore. Now you have to get more specific in your desire. You have to add a certain embellishment to it. And then once you've enjoyed that, then that's not enough. And you can see this from the first time you smell a flower. Smell that flower the first time, woo, beautiful scent. Smell it the second time, a little bit less. Third time, by the fifth time, you can't smell the rose at all. That's the nature of all desire. Don't forget it. It will be a great help to you if you understand that if you run after your desires, repeated desires never produce the same joy. I read an article on coffee and caffeine, and they said that, yes, when you have that first cup of coffee that you've ever had, it gives you that jolt. It gives you that caffeinated, I'm at energy. I'm going to go accomplish, be. And it's great. But they said what happens after 2 weeks of drinking that cup of coffee, you now need that cup of coffee for the mind to reach normal. And you'll need to drink more coffee on top of that to get the same buzz that the first cup of coffee gave you when you started. So your body will continue to adjust to require you to need more and more coffee to do the same thing that one cup used to do for you. That's the nature of desire in this world. Take that as just a statement of fact, not a statement of religiosity or smug self-righteousness. It's a fact of this world, and if you understand it, believe it, and act accordingly, you will be saved an enormous amount of pain. An enormous amount of pain. Because a life where you chase after your desires is a life of constant hunger, of ever increasing need and desire. because everybody becomes a connoisseur of their desires, which means just a cup of Folgers is not going to do it anymore. You're going to be running around to. Have you heard of that coffee that they feed it? They feed the coffee beans to elephants, and they go through the digestive system of the elephant. And they come out in the poop, and they take the beans, which are undigested, but having gone through that chemical process. I only laugh at this because I'm a big coffee drinker, and I was looking for what is the most expensive connoisseur coffee in the world, and it's that coffee that's been fed to elephants and pooped out and recollected. All right. That's where it ends. If you go after the perfect cup of coffee, you're going to end up chasing elephants to sort your beans out from their excreta. So that's the joy. That's the lesson right there for the night. Don't run after your desires. Understand that God is the only fulfillment for life. And knowing that presence, finding that presence within you, nurturing that presence so that it becomes apparent. That which is obvious becomes apparent to you. You're not distracted by mind. Live that life, a life of inspiration and not a life of grabbing and in an endless pursuit for something out there that's going to make you happy or fulfill you. The glory of good persons is in their own consciences, not in the praise of others. The happiness of the good is in God and of God, and their joy is in the truth, right? So we're not dependent. Those people who have this relationship with the divine or have this presence or are aware of this presence, that is their own fulfillment. It's not the conditions and circumstances of their moment that determines how they feel or that determines whether they're content or not. They've taken their minds off of the things that change constantly, that can't be relied on, and have placed them on an inner silence, an inner space that isn't changed, that is beyond change. It is beyond the effect of the world. And if you can learn to live there, if you can find that place within yourself, learn how to establish yourself in that place, then the world goes on and you are completely undisturbed by it. You are completely nonplussed by it. And you can sit in your own bliss, soaked in your own joy of being, ever ready to help and to serve and to care without ever needing to leave that space. You live a life of inspiration, not a life of being driven. Those who long for true everlasting happiness do not care for that which is temporal, right? Because the only thing for sure in this world is change, right? So those who are looking for something not unchanging, an unchanging happiness, their natural bliss, right? They will not look for it in the external world. That's the whole point of the Garden of Eden. That's exactly what got Eve into trouble and Adam. She looked at the fruit and saw that it was beautiful. She got pulled into her senses. She could have stopped there if she had understood that she was looking at the beauty of the divine and put her mind back on God. But because of her confusing conversation with the serpent, she begins to think, oh, well, maybe I should eat that fruit, right? That was the second fault. She wanted to take it. And the third and final act was she thought that it would make her like God. She thought that it would fulfill her. And so what he's telling us here is if you want an unchanging happiness in your life, if you want to know this bliss, if you want to know this peace that passes understanding, don't go out through the senses to find it. You will never come back. You will leave Eden and you will not be able to find your way back in, because the flaming sword of desire in the hand of the cherubim will keep you from entering the garden again, right? So do not look for your fulfillment through your senses, through this world of change. Those who long for a true everlasting happiness do not care for that which is temporal. Those who seek temporal glory, those who seek their fulfillment in this world of sense, did what Eve did, and don't treat it with contempt. Have little love for the joy of heaven. Those who are indifferent to praise or blame have great tranquility of heart. Yes, they have found the heart. They have found the shrine. That's the first assignment of every spiritual seeker. Find the shrine. Find that, the mantra is very helpful for finding the shrine. Yes, the shrine is the source of that mantra. So as that mantra is going, you begin knowing the mantra and God are one and the same. So start becoming aware of the presence that you're invoking when you call the name of God. And then after you've been doing it long enough where the mantra can happen by itself, you don't any longer have to be generating it. You can become the observer of mantra as it sounds in the mind. And when you're the observer of that mantra in the mind, begin listening for its source. Where is it coming from? Where does mantra arise? Because mantra is God and God is love. Where is this mantra coming from? And follow it more subtle. Get below the word. Get below the sound. Where is it coming from? And it will lead you to the heart, to the shrine. And in that shrine is where you will find the presence of the beloved. In that shrine is where you will take refuge from the changing world. In that shrine is where you'll stand when you're being corrected, when you're being judged, when you're being mistreated, when your life is not experiencing external peace. You will carry your own with you. Persons whose conscience is clear have peace and contentment. All right? Peace and contentment come from you being true to your nature. It just keeps coming back to the Satchitananda within you. Know who you are and act accordingly. That's the summary for all of these many, many words and many, many points. That's the final bit. Know who you are. You are Satchitananda. You are love. You are wisdom. And you are existence. You are presence. Be that. Work at that. Nurture that. Support that. And by doing that, you will begin to see it in others because you've assumed it about yourself. Now you will safely assume that about others. And when somebody offends you, you'll be surprised that something like that came out of them. And you won't hold it against them because well, that's an exemption. That's not from their nature. So you don't judge them. You just now know that they're body identified a bit or mind identified a bit. So persons whose conscience is clear, people who are living in accordance with their nature, living in accordance with the divine emanating from them, they have peace and contentment. You are no better for being praised. You are no worse for being blamed, for you are what you are, nor will you be more, nor will you be less than God sees you to be. Right? This is that whole statement of the Gita, that the self, the soul within you, can't be wedded, can't be burned. It can't be affected by the changing world. It's the container of all of the change. It is the potential of all change, right? You are not in this world. This world is within you. That's another thing that becomes apparent to you when you silence the mind. You begin to understand that the whole world exists within you. You'll see it. You'll watch it pop down to a single point on an old tube television after you turn it off. So you're no better for being praised. You're no worse off for being blamed, for you are what you are, nor will you be more or less than what God sees you to be. If you know what you are within yourself, the opinions of others will not interest you, right? Because you strive to please that divine nature within, to stay true to yourself. And if you're staying true to yourself, you don't need to be true to anyone else. Because if you're being true to the Atman, to the soul, to the self, you're being true to everyone. Because that is the nature of everyone. We see only the face, but God sees into the heart. That's a quote from 1 Samuel 16:7. It's an Old Testament book. Samuel was a prophet. We look at the actions, but God considers the intentions. Always to do the best you can and make little of yourself is the mark of a humble soul. To refuse consolation from any creature shows cleanness of heart and confidence in God. Yeah. Those who seek no outward testimony for themselves have committed themselves entirely to God, right? Those who seek no outward testimony for themselves, those who are not defining themselves by what others think about them, those who are out there working for people's approval, working for people's thinking good about them, working for people's appreciation, right? Because the spiritual soul is working in the moment. There is no motive in them but love and wisdom. And not because they've generated love or wisdom, but because they've silenced the mind of ego, which channels things out through selfishness, channels things out that serve the body or serve the mind, right? This is coming from the other side. It's an inspiration that comes from the backside of mind, from the backside of body. It doesn't come in through the front. It doesn't come in through the senses. This is your nature. This is what is the flames that are coming up from your being. And they are what inspire you to love, what inspire you to wisdom. For St. Paul says, "For it is not the one who commends himself who is really approved, but the one whom the Lord commends." Right? So you could deepen this, that idea there. It's not the one who commends himself who is really approved, not the one who thinks he's great who is great, not the one who has justifications and stories for all of his behaviors, but it's the one whom the Lord commends. And what does that mean? How does the Lord commend somebody? The Lord commends somebody by returning you to your bliss when you act according to the divine within you. That's where the words that Paul says, when he says, "It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." Did he go and get Christ from the outside and put Christ in him? That's the modern teaching on it, but no, that's not what happens. The image of God is already within us. It has always been within us. It will always be within us. That is where the commendation, when you live in accordance with that nature, the commendation is in the peace you will feel, the bliss that you will become aware of in yourself. That's the commendation of the presence of God. It just simply means you will be aware of that presence. Your conscience, which will be clean, will no longer hinder your view, hinder your understanding. Your mind will have silence to a certain degree so that you can see beyond it, right? You can see the nature beyond it. You can stop being told everything by an ignorant mind so that which is obvious can become apparent to you. For it is not one who commends himself who is really approved, but the one whom the Lord commends. Those who continually live intimately with God. Right? Brother Lawrence, practice of the presence. This is what he's talking about. Those who continually live intimately with the divine, intimately with the idea of love, intimately with this wisdom and silence of peace that's within us. Those who continually live intimately with God, not bound by any outward attachment, right? No identity. What is an attachment? An attachment is when you think that thing involves you, right? You can have 5 cars in a row. You can just not even pay attention to them. That's non-attachment. But to say that red Volkswagen is mine, or I like that green Corvette, that's my favorite. Having things that affect your condition of mind is attachment. And you do it by identifying me and mine with those objects, right? So those who continually live intimately with God, not bound by any outward attachment, having no attachments, having no identity of themselves coming from the outside. They don't take attributes from the outside world. They don't feel like they're proud when they drive a Lamborghini. They don't consider the fact that everybody looks at them with envy to be a positive thing. Wouldn't even occur to them. They don't care. They're just who they are. They're just always the same person. Most of us, if you put us around this group of people, we act that way. You put us around that group of people, we act that way. You put us alone, we act in a different way. But for that person who is anchored in the presence of the beloved, they act the same in all of those conditions, because that is what they are, and that is what inspires them. They are not manipulated by conditions and circumstances. They're not manipulated by opinions and activities of others. So those who continually live intimately with God, not bound by any outward attachment, are in a state of interior life, right? Their interior life has become for them bigger than the external world, which is not an unusual state for saints anyway. So we'll end there for the night.